Okay, so we're going to start off with some mole to particle today. Now keep in mind, particle can also be atoms. So depending upon how it's labeled, it might be particles, it might be atoms, or it could be molecules too. It really depends upon what you're dealing with. So just know that this can be particle, atom, or molecule. Okay. In order to do these problems, you have to use this equality. So 1 mole is 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. And when we talked back in October, we talked about a mole, and a mole being that many particles. And there was the mole song, if you remember that. So we have to use this equality. So it's kind of like if you were comparing miles to kilometers. It's a conversion. So this is a conversion factor from moles to particles. And we're going to be making a fraction out of this in order to cancel out what we start with. So if we start with moles, we're going to have moles on the bottom. So this fraction is going to come from this equality. So it would be 1 mole on the bottom, and then we'd have our 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd particles, atom, molecules, whatever it is. And then since this would essentially be in the numerator, right? Because we can say this is over 1. Well, that's going to cause these to cancel. And then your ending label is going to be, in this case, particle. And then we just have to have our starting number of moles to calculate this out. Now, when you're doing these problems, remember that you're always going to multiply by the top and divide by the bottom. So whatever this number is, we're multiplying by the 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, dividing by 1. Dividing by 1 doesn't do anything to it, so you can essentially skip that step and you'll get your value here. If we start with atoms, then our atoms value is going to be on the bottom. So we would have atoms is going to be the same as our particles, the 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd. I apologize, it's kind of scrunched together. And then we'd have our 1 mole on top, which is then going to allow for our atoms label to cancel. And then the only thing we have left is going to be our mole, and that will be our answer. And again, remember you're multiplying by the top, dividing by the bottom. Multiplying by 1 here is not going to make a difference. So you can essentially skip that part. You would just be taking whatever the number is over here, dividing by the 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd, and getting your answer. I am going to do a couple examples with you quick too. So if I start with 5 moles of oxygen and I want to figure out how many particles that is, or atoms, okay? So we're going to put mole on the bottom, so it's going to be 1 mole. And then our 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd atoms, okay? Now when you're plugging this into your calculator, I want to point something out because we're going to take 5 times 6.02. Now you could do the times 10 and then the power button, but calculators have a special EE button. And what EE means is EE means times 10 to the power of whatever number you're going to put in after that. Okay, so I've got my 6.02. I'm going to hit, now mine is just this button. Some of them you're going to have to hit second and then whichever button it is. You'll have to see that. If you need help with that, let me know. But I'm going to hit EE, so I've got the 6.02. Now this means times 10 to the power. So I need to put in 23. And then my final answer is going to be 3.01. And that 24 means times 10 to the power of, so times 10 to the power of 24. And that's going to be atoms. Now, if I had more space, I would make this all on one line. But due to my limitations in width here, we're just going to have, like, it's 3.01 times 10 to the 24th atoms. Okay, so that's what this means here. Different calculators have different ways of putting it. Some of them will say 3.01 E24. So just if you have questions on that part, that's probably the trickiest part of these problems. All right, let's do one more where we're going the opposite direction. So if we start with 3.7 times 10 to the 23rd, whoops, and that's going to be atoms of O2. I'm just going to keep it O2 for this problem. And again, scrunched. And so we want to get rid of atoms. So we know that our 6.02 number is going to be on the bottom, times 10 to the 23rd. And that's going to be atoms of O2. So that means we're going to have mole on top. And we want to go to, this is going to cancel with this. So now we multiply by 1. We don't have to worry about multiplying by 1. So I'm going to go 3.7 and then EE 23. And then I need to divide by this. So divide by 6.02 EE 23 equals, and I end up with 0.61. Okay. Now, if you end up with a number where there's an EE at the end and it's telling you a value, then chances are you goofed up something with the division. So make sure that you are using the EE button. If you do not use the EE button and you plug this in as it is, and you just put 3.7 times 10 to the 23rd, and then you say divided by this, it's going to divide by only the 6.2, get that answer, and then multiply by the 10 to the 23rd. So it's really important that you use that EE button. Otherwise, you're going to have to put parentheses around this value when you're dividing it, because you do have to make sure this multiplies out before you can divide this by it. I hope that makes sense. It's order of operations. So this won't matter because that's going to multiply out first because that's the order they're in. But when you divide, you need to make sure you're either using the EE button or put parentheses around these so that it's taking these together first before it divides this by that. If you don't do it that way, you will end up with a number that's like probably 6.1 times 10 to the 23rd or something like that, where you end up with a big value. Since we're taking the 10 to the 23rd dividing by the 10 to the 23rd, our number should not have a times 10 to a power over here, because essentially these would cancel, is one way to look at it. So make sure that you're thinking logically through the answers when you are doing these problems. And if you have questions, let me know.